So I've already done the intro to this video. We're redoing it again because my computer crapped out. So hello, we're speeding through it. PragerU, it's bad. They made a detransition documentary. We're gonna go over it. And you know what? I need you to know a few things before we go into this. Number one, PragerU is funded by a bunch of billionaires who are unaccountable and largely untraceable. And really, we only know that they're funded by billionaires because, well, sometimes those billionaires mention it in an offhand way. Notably, the Wilkes family, which has two members that are worth $1.4 billion apiece, fund PragerU and have spent tens of millions of dollars supporting PragerU, both directly from their own family fortunes or indirectly through different nonprofits that they all donate to and run. Now, the Wilkes family made its fortune off of fracking and natural gas and oil, so you can kind of guess why some of the content of PragerU caters to that. But on top of it, the Wilkes family is informally known as the Koch brothers of, the Christian nationalist right. So, that's kind of the interest that they have, and they've talked. The brothers have talked publicly about, not approving of gay people, thinking that gayness is a symptom of moral depravity, and how basically in their ideal worlds, gay people and trans people would not exist. Which really makes it much more sensical that PragerU puts together anti-trans documentaries, because that's kind of the ideal of the people who fund them. Now, to kind of set the stage for what PragerU tends to believe, here's a video called Sex is Binary by PragerU. And we're going to go over it real quick.
Asked to define the word woman during her Supreme Court.
And it has no audio, so we're going to refresh.
Asked to define the word woman during her Supreme Court.
Are you guys hearing audio? Because I am not. Clearly, something has gone amiss. There we go.
Confirmation
there we
hearings
go.
in 2022, Judge Ketanji Jackson famously demurred, saying, "I'm not a biologist."
I'm sorry, it was loud. I couldn't hear it. Now I can.
Well, I am a biologist, and I'm here to help. To that end, let me rephrase the question to Judge Jackson. Are sex categories in humans, male and female, real, immutable, and binary?
Now, where I was before when the video cut short is pointing out that the question asked Ketanji Jackson Brown is different from the question this guy asked. He didn't just rephrase the question, he asked a completely different question that is asking about different characteristics, right? So when someone asks, what is a woman? Well, woman is gender identity. It's a gender identity. It is not a sex. Now, people often colloquially will use woman and female interchangeably, but they are two different things. Because again, woman is a gender identity, whereas female refers to sex-based characteristics, right? Now, he's asking, are sex-based characteristics real? Yes. Are they immutable, though? And the answer that is very apparent if you look at the animal kingdom, or, biology textbooks or biology papers is no, actually. And here's the example I gave earlier. Look, 11 animals that can change their sex. We got clownfish, we got hawkfish, we got sea bass, we got this little guy, we got banana slugs, we got butterflies, we got cardinals, we got frogs, we got copperhead snakes, we've got bearded dragons, we've got giant green sea turtles. All of these animals can change their sex. That's pretty cool. But you know what else? You might be saying, oh, but Jack, mammals can't change their sex. It's just beyond the furry warm form to change sex. And it turns out that is also incorrect, because lions have been proven in the wild to grow manes and start behaving as male lions. Which you'll notice the growing manes, it's not like there are lion barbers, chat. Clearly, a sex-based characteristic is altering within their bodies. So, just letting you guys know, sex characteristics are in fact mutable. Now, another question posed here is, are sex characteristics binary? And the answer to that is no. No, they're not. In fact, sex is widely regarded as bimodal. Okay? A bimodal spectrum, chat. Here is an example of one. All right? Here is a bimodal spectrum that I've blown up really big. I know it's not the highest resolution thing, but hey, look, you've got two different distributions here. You know, you've got one hump that's largely characterized as male characteristics, got one hump that's largely characterized as female characteristics, and where they overlap in the middle is considered intersex. And where you have it on the far left is like ultra hyper masculine, where you have it on the far right is ultra hyper feminine, right? And so what we have here is essentially the idea that, well, frankly, sex isn't binary. Because binary is either a 1 or a 2, right? You are either one thing or you are a second thing. There is no middle option. The fact that there is a middle option, the fact that there are outliers that are more masculine or more feminine than the average of the bimodal spectrum, indicate that there is in fact not a 1 or a 0. You know, it's not a either or situation. There is in fact a degree to which you can be masculine, a degree to which you can be feminine, and a degree to which, you know, you might be somewhere in the middle. And that's okay, right? So, already, to point this out, he's asking in his rephrased question really several different things while misconstruing what the original question actually asked. So, let's continue.
Or are they merely social constructs?
So again, this is muddying the question because, and a lot of people in science will tell you this, science is a social construct. How we categorize things is socially constructed. Now granted, when we categorize via the scientific method, it yields many useful results. So we tend to use and rely upon the scientific method for our categorization. But where we draw our lines is to a degree arbitrary, right? The same way like the international date line, is largely arbitrary. We could base all of our time, instead of using Greenwich Mean Time, on any other, latitude. But we don't. We use Greenwich Mean Time arbitrarily. Meaning that our time and how we tell time around the world is, to a degree, socially constructed. Time itself isn't a social construct. It exists in some way. But how we count time, the numbers we use, the counting system we use is socially constructed. Because all categories and groupings are socially constructed for our benefit, right? Now, just because something is socially constructed, and this is something that a lot of conservatives get wrong, just because something is socially constructed doesn't mean it's not real. Just because Greenwich Mean Time it was arbitrarily selected as like where we're going to tell time from, the latitude we are going to derive our time telling from, doesn't mean it's not real. It doesn't mean like you could just be late to a meeting and be like, time's a social construct, bro. Like, no. Like, obviously, it has a reality in our world. But the issue is conservatives think that a social construct is just, oh, that you're just saying it's not real, it's not important, and that's actually quite the reverse. But let's keep watching this video. So it's very interesting to me that he, again, in the construction of this question, is like, oh, is this thing real or is it a social construct? And the issue is sex characteristics are real, but so are social constructs. So this question is inherently flawed from the beginning.
Answer: real. That's just the way it is, and we all know it. Immutable. It can't be changed. And binary. There are only two sexes, not 3 or 4 or 57. This is true throughout the plant and animal kingdoms.
I literally just gave you like a dozen examples of how that's not true.
Organism sex is defined by the type of gamete, sperm or ova, it can or would produce. Males have the function of producing sperm, or small gametes, and females ova, or large ones.
So, and again, this is interesting to me because you can very easily find female women who don't produce ova. You can find male men who don't produce sperm, okay? You can find this within, like, even a binary construction, which is just further going to show that sex characteristics are bimodal, not binary. He's an evolutionary biologist, so he shouldn't really get a say in this.
Or large ones. There is no third gamete type. There are only two. Therefore, sex is binary. This shouldn't be controversial. It's just basic biology. Every one of us is the result of a male and a female.
This guy really needs to read a basic biology textbook written in like 2020, okay?
Our biological mom and dad successfully reproducing. Sorry to make you think about that. Without the existence of males and females, I wouldn't be here right now, and neither would you. Our species would have gone extinct long ago. Many gender activists, however, falsely assert that sex cannot be binary and must be viewed as a spectrum.
That's because the bimodal distribution of sex characteristics is a spectrum. That would be why. Because you even have examples of people who exist who can both produce sperm and produce eggs. There are people whose bodies can do both. And like the way that these people get around that is just by saying, "Oh, well they're just, they're just deviations. They're just like genetic freaks." But like that's kind of the point. In a binary model, you don't have deviations. You don't have genetic freaks. Which is obviously not the case. Gender is not binary, and neither is sex.
Because a very small number of people have genitalia that appear ambiguous or mixed, phenomena known as intersex conditions. These ideologues...
By the way, intersex conditions, they say, oh, only a very, very small number. The number of people who have intersex conditions is roughly analogous to the number of people in the world who have red hair. Okay? Have you ever met a redhead in your life? Then you've also met people who are intersex, whether you know it or not.
Claim the existence of such conditions renders the categories male and female meaningless. But
no, it just means that male and female exist on a bimodal spectrum. It doesn't mean that they're meaningless categories. The categories themselves are still useful for broad generalizations. But it does mean that it is not a binary system if you can get a combination of the binary. Just definitionally, that's not how a binary works.
Intersex conditions don't undermine the sex binary at all, because sex ambiguity is not a third sex. The existence of very rare
It doesn't have to be on a bimodal spectrum. It just means that it's not binary.
For borderline cases, no more raise questions about everyone else's sex than the existence of dawn and dusk cast doubt.
This is like saying, "Oh, yes, I'm going to code a binary system on a computer and using ones and zeros, and then occasionally you throw in like a 2 or a 0.5." And like that's not a binary computer system anymore.
Onto the existence of day and night. Our society isn't experiencing a sudden dramatic surge in people born with ambiguous genitalia. We're experiencing a dramatic surge in people who are unambiguously one sex, claiming to identify as the opposite sex.
Okay, but here's the thing, right? If you can acknowledge that there is this, non-binary distribution, right? Then you can acknowledge that if someone were, say, to be born with a certain set of sex characteristics, but desire the sex characteristics of a different group or a different position on this bimodal spectrum, then they could do things that would move them one way or another on this bimodal spectrum. They could change certain sex characteristics to move in the spectrum, right? Meaning that, for example, a man who feels like he's lost his vim and vigor in his early 50s or late 40s might take testosterone injections and suddenly feel much more manly, effectively moving him towards a more masculine point on this bimodal distribution. Or postmenopausal women taking estrogen to shift where they are along the spectrum. Injecting our bodies with hormones, whether we're cis or trans, does things to our bodies. Now, trans people just take a lot more hormones to move themselves a lot more on this bimodal spectrum. Intersex does not reduce to ambiguous genitalia either. Yeah, lots of people are intersex without having, like, external differences in genitalia, right? Like, I'm reminded of that story, right, of that guy. Man discovers he has uterus. Yeah. Yeah, like, I mean, here's a story. And by the way, this isn't an uncommon story, right? Here's man admitted to hospital for kidney stone, discovers he's a woman. Colorado man who was admitted to hospital for kidney stone received surprising news when the nurse came back with test results revealing he was actually a woman. When I was about 6 years old, I started having these feminine feelings, but that was in the 60s. Wearing my mom's makeup, I thought I looked pretty. When he went to the emergency room 5 years ago, he wasn't too shocked when the nurse told him he had traits of both genders in his ultrasound results. He was intersex, meaning he had both genitalia and internal female sex organs. So, again, this framing is from 2012, so don't be too surprised here. But essentially, this guy, who'd his entire life been raised as a man, discovered he had a uterus, right? And guys, this is not an uncommon story. This is, man shocked to discover he has a fully functioning womb. Doctors told the 37-year-old man it appears he could even get pregnant and give birth. Yeah, he went to the doctor for signs of possible bladder cancer after blood in his urine. And, he had fully functioning female reproductive organs. Like, again, this is not an uncommon situation. It's just that now we have the science to actually, like, understand that. This is not at all uncommon. So, the situation here is actually a bit different than what this guy is saying it is. We actually have the same number of people being born with these conditions. It's just that we are now better able to diagnose these conditions, right? As time continues on, we're better able to diagnose these conditions and recognize them for what they are. Because, like 100 years ago, they really didn't know what organs you had unless they cut you open and, like, looked at the organs you had. So, like, this is something that just happens to human beings. Now, it's also true that more people now are identifying as a different sex, right? Or, i.e., as transgender, or to meet this framing, transsexual. Specifically because, for a number of different reasons. One, because the technology is now here and so more commonplace, meaning that you can actually get treatment for, your condition, as opposed to just living with it quietly, hoping all of your relatives die, and or slipping away and just starting a new life on the other side of the country, right? Or other side of the world. Which is what people had to do, right? Like back in the 1920s, if you wanted to have a sex change, you had to go to Germany. You had to go to the Weimar Republic. If it was the 1930s or 40s, you had to go to, like, Sweden. All right? There were only like 5 doctors in the world that would do this stuff. But you know what? Now we have more doctors who know how to do this stuff. We have better treatments. We have better medicine. There's a lot more options to alleviate the suffering trans people have. So, more people identify as a different sex because it's more of a possibility now than it ever has been before. Additionally, more people identify as a different sex because it's less dangerous now than it has been before in the past. Because again, while occasionally you would have heartwarming stories of, like, some of the early transitioning stories would be like, former U.S. Marine dons her wedding gown and gets married, and, like, father walks her down the aisle, and I'm so proud of her. She finally gets to live the life she's always wanted, and she's so happy. Like, and that's like a story from, like, 1940, right? But in the interim between 1940 and now, there were a lot of horror stories. We got stories of, like, trans women being beheaded by their boyfriends. We got stories of, like, trans kids being murdered by their parents. We got stories of, like, serial killers targeting trans women. The primary focus of media was how freakish and weird trans women were, and trans people in general, right? Like, I grew up, in the 1990s, and my perception of trans people growing up was, oh, they're like the circus freaks who get trotted out on Maury Povich or Jerry Springer for, like, the crowd to laugh at or to feel, like, ashamed at being sexually attracted to. So, like, that's where we have been. And it's only in, like, the last 10 years, and we even saw it in the headline I brought up there about, that guy who went to the doctor and found out he had a uterus. And the news story from 11 years ago framed it as, oh, he found out he's really a woman. But, like, even within the article, he's like, yeah, I guess I have a uterus. That's pretty weird. But he's still identified as a man. And yeah, Jim Carrey in Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. Like, the main punchline of that movie was how disgusting it was that the villain was a transgender woman. Like, it's really weird. But only recently has it kind of become like, oh, wait, trans people are human beings who can live healthy and happy lives and deserve love and respect. That's only a very recent phenomenon for trans people. And the response to that is kind of indicating that a lot of people are interested in seeing whether or not they are trans. Because guess what, guys? When they do surveys on trans people, most of the time they are, like you see like the headlines of like, oh, Gen Z, more of Gen Z are identifying as LGBT than ever before, but like that includes surveying people who are just willing to question whether or not they might be gay, whether or not they might be bisexual, whether or not they might be trans. And like, not everyone is going to be that, but it is good to go through a period of questioning your identity and figuring out who you are, right? That's actually really important to do. So, let's continue in this video. Because again, PragerU is presenting this as a problem, right?
Or as something other than male or female
It's a
altogether.
social epidemic.
Gender ideology seeks to portray sex as so incomprehensibly complex and multivariable that our traditional practice of classifying people as either male or female is grossly outdated and should be abandoned.
That's not gender ideology. That's just mainstream biology. Like, if you get to college-level biology and you try and say, sex is only male or female, you're gonna get laughed out of the classroom. Hell, you're gonna get laughed out of the classroom in a high school biology class for saying that. Right? Like, you can rely on these older constructs, these basic, binary constructs, but they only take you so far into understanding advanced subject matter, right? Like, you can say, they only understand third grade biology. True, right? But this is kind of the defense. It's relying on appealing to people's outdated ideas and saying any new type of thinking, any new information should be disregarded because it's new and strange. And also, again, I've used this example before, and I think it's fun to use because it relates to kind of like the gender identity argument, right? But I like to use the example of a chair, right? Picture a chair in your mind. Now, a chair is a relatively simple thing, right? It's just like, four legs, has a back, you can sit in it. Pretty simple, right?
Gender ideology? You mean cishet patriarchy, Republican scum.
True, Kairyu. But a chair is relatively simple. 4 legs, maybe some armrests, a back, you can sit in it. Now, how does sitting in a chair work? Hell, how does a chair resting on the ground work? Because it seems simple, right? But how does that actually work? Well, you break it down, and it turns out the chair is actually made up of different components. Maybe there are some metal components in there. Maybe there are some wood components in there as well. You got your screws, you got your different strands of cellulose fibers from different plants all squished together and put together to make something more comfortable. But then you continue looking at what actually is a chair, and it turns out the chair is made up of not just these different materials, but also different molecule compounds, molecular structures. Oh, that's pretty crazy. And then you start looking even further into what are the molecules made out of, and it turns out the molecules are all made out of different atom components, and the atoms are all somehow staying next to each other, even though the vast majority of atomic space is made up of nothing. And suddenly you are looking at the reality that a chair just sitting there in a room, or you sitting on a chair, something that seemed really simple a couple minutes ago, right? Is actually really complicated, because you've gone from understanding a chair as like just an object that sits in a room that you can sit on, to realizing that there's actually numerous different ways to analyze and break down a chair, numerous different ways where a chair can be made so much more complicated, and it goes deeper and deeper and deeper, and suddenly you're realizing that the vast majority of what a chair even is empty space of just atoms repelling each other. And then you can go even deeper than that and find out that the empty spaces can actually be full of these quantum elements and quantum particles, and actually a chair has a certain percentage of just imaginary particles that are bubbling up out of space-time that are contributing to the repelling of atoms.
I want conservatives to give me a consistent definition of a chair that includes this.
So, what I'm trying to get at here is when he says, like, oh, male, gender ideology wants to complicate male and female, it's just like, well, no. Reality has already complicated that for you. It's just that you exist in a reality where
This is reminding me of the SCP that is a living chair.
you only want to view reality as these two things, when reality itself is far more infinitely complex. And the deeper you get into those complexities, the more language you need to describe them. Right? The more language you need to describe them. And I'm sure something tells me we're going to come back around to chairs eventually. But it's just worth pointing out here that for conservatism, it needs to be a simple binary. Because complicated things that take in-depth explanations defy the conservative world order. The way that they want to conceptualize the world in this archetypical conflict between good and evil, men and women, the light and the darkness. They want things to be simple. It undermines their authoritarian idea of how things need to be and should be structured.
Female is grossly outdated and should be abandoned, for a revolutionary concept of gender identity. This new system holds that males shouldn't be barred from female.
And it's also interesting because here, right, you'll notice that he now switches from talking about sex to gender identity. A completely different thing, unrelated to sex characteristics.
Identity. This new system holds that males shouldn't be barred from female sports, women's prisons, or other spaces previously segregated, so long as they identify as female. But intersex and transgender...
One thing that's really interesting here is that he glosses over the fact, right, that in a lot of these cases, like participation in women's sports or being in women's prison, right, have certain requirements attached to them for trans people. Like, if a trans woman wants to participate in sports, generally there has to be a certain level of transition that they've gone through, like 1 to 2 years of hormones, meaning that they have literally have a requirement to change sex characteristics about themselves in order to participate in a sport or in order to be in a women's prison. Right?
shouldn't be barred from female sports, women's prisons, or other spaces previously...
Also, women's shelters should just be open to like people who identify as women. That I think that's just categorically a good thing to do. Yeah.
Segregated so long as they identify as female.
Because just as an FYI, there aren't a ton of men's shelters for like domestic violence. Just throwing that out there. Maybe there should be more, but even if there were more, like trans men should be able to go to men's shelters. Trans women should be able to go to women's shelters. They are both men and women. There's not a sex category for them, you know? Like, it's not a female shelter.
But intersex and transgender mean entirely different things.
It's
Intersex
true.
people have extremely rare
It's true. Intersex and transgender mean different things. That is true. Not all trans people are intersex, though intersex people are generally accepted under the transgender umbrella.
conditions that result in apparent sex ambiguity. Transgender people, however, aren't sexually ambiguous at all, but merely claim to identify as something other than their biological.
So this is very funny to me, right? Because the stipulation here, right, is that trans people aren't biologically differentiated from cisgender people whatsoever. And yet, when you look at the actual data around trans people and like transitionary care, you find that there are a lot of trans people who are biologically sexually differentiated from cisgender men or cisgender women, right? Because if you are a transgender person, oftentimes you will be on testosterone or you will be on estrogen, right? So what happens when your body is flooded with testosterone? What happens when your body is flooded with estrogen and testosterone blockers? What happens to the human body? It develops new sex characteristics. Trans women grow breasts. Trans women grow big, fat, dumpy asses. Okay? Trans men grow big muscles. They start growing out facial hair. Trans women start like having their hair and skin turn softer. Their facial hair tends to go away to some extent. You know, like there are a lot of changes that take place. Trans men, their voices drop. Trans women, their genitalia begins to differentiate. Like there's a lot of physical sex-based differentiation that occurs. So the question here is, why is PragerU just blatantly lying about this? Because the impression that they're trying to give here is just that, oh, transgender people are just like men who want to wear dresses. You know? Which isn't true. Or that transgender people are just women who want to wear jeans. That's something only women can do. Or that's something only men can do, rather. So this is just misframing, I guess. I'm gonna say it's probably more than just misframing. It's a deliberate lie.
Sex. Once you're conscious of this distinction, you'll begin to notice that gender activists attempt to steer discussions away from, for example, whether men who identify as women should be allowed to compete in female sports, and toward prominent intersex athletes like South African runner Caster Semenya.
What? No, it's actually it's very simple. I have multiple videos going over this. Men who identify as women and who meet certain transitional thresholds should be allowed to compete in female sports. Yeah. Yeah. If you've been on hormones for a year or 2 years, there's some debate on whether it should be a year or 2 years, you should be able to compete in women's sports. Also, I'm not gonna lie. Most of the people who bring up intersex folk, like Caster Semenya, are conservatives, arguing that she should be barred for like having higher than normal levels of testosterone. Like that, like that's just how it goes. Conservatives are the ones who bring her up all the time. I mean, just out of curiosity. When was this? Yeah, by the way, Caster Semenya like became an issue in 2009. It's now 2023, and again, this video is the one to bring up Caster
to compete in
Semenya.
female sports, and toward prominent intersex athletes like South African runner Caster Semenya.
And it's 2023. You're the conservative outlet bringing her up.
Why? Because so long as they've got you on your heels, making difficult judgment calls on individuals with medically complicated intersex conditions.
Look, as a transgender woman, I'm on my heels all the time, okay? That's why I always make sure that they're comfortable and practical.
They've succeeded in drawing your attention away from making easy calls on unquestionably male athletes, like 2022 NCAA Division I women's swimming and diving champion Leah Thomas.
Wait, Leah Thomas...
NCAA Division on unquestionably male athletes, like 2022 NCAA Division I women's...
Leah Thomas had been on hormones for 2 years. Leah Thomas was on hormones the previous year she competed when she was forced to compete in the men's division. She had been on hormones for 2 years. But as we all know, the long game of transgender people is to go from being a very good swimmer in the men's division. Like, I think Leah Thomas was like number 1 or 2 ranked swimmer in the men's division, and then she started transitioning, and wow, wouldn't you know it, she dropped to like 200th or something. She dropped like a rock in the rankings because she was forced to compete in the men's division. And then wow, what a shock in the women's division after she transitioned medically for 2 years, i.e. altered her sex-based characteristics for 2 years. Wow, it turns out she was a good swimmer again in the women's division. That's shocking. That's crazy.
Swimming and diving champion Leah Thomas. They shift the focus to intersex.
Yes, I realized that they dead named her.
To distract from transgender.
No, actually, it's totally fine that Leah Thomas competed. And, like, if you actually look up anything about Leah Thomas and her competition, like, you can just, like, look at her Wikipedia page. Like, you can just look up her Wikipedia page. Let's take a look here. Swimming career. Thomas began swimming on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania in 2017. During her freshman year, Thomas recorded a time of 8 minutes and 57.55 seconds in the 1,000-yard freestyle that ranked as the 6th fastest national men's time, and also recorded 500-yard freestyle and 1,650-yard freestyle times that ranked within the national top 100. So, literally, freshman year, one of the fastest swimmers in the nation in the men's division. On the men's swim team in 2018 to 2019, Thomas finished second in the men's 500, 1,000, and 1,650-yard freestyle at the Ivy League Championships as a sophomore in 2019. During the 2018 to 2019 season, Thomas recorded the top UPenn men's team times in the 500 free, 1,000 free, and 1,650 free, but was the 6th best among UPenn's men's team members in the 200 free. So again, the fastest swimmer at her university in the men's division in multiple forms of swimming, right? During 2019. And the second fastest in the Ivy League championships, and again, still one of the fastest in the nation in the men's division at UPenn. Thomas began transitioning using hormone replacement therapy in May of 2019 and came out as a trans woman during her junior year to her coaches, friends, and the women's and men's swim teams at the University of Pennsylvania. She was required to swim for the men's team in the 2019 to 2020 academic year as a junior while undergoing hormone therapy, and then swam on the women's team in 2021 and 2022 after taking a year off school to maintain her eligibility to compete while competitive swimming was canceled due to COVID. By 2021, she had met NCAA hormone therapy requirements to swim on the women's team. Thomas lost muscle mass and strength through testosterone suppression and hormone replacement therapy. Her time for the 500 freestyle was over 15 seconds slower than her personal best before medically transitioning. Thomas's event progression peaked in 2019 for distance swimming, with a drop in times during the 2021 to 2022 season. Her event progression for swimming, sprint swimming, reflected a dip at the start of the 2021 to 2022 season, before returning to near lifetime bests in the 100 free and a lifetime personal best in the 50 free in 2021. In 2018 to 2019 season, she was, while competing in the men's team, ranked 550th in the 200th. Okay, and this is, by the way, what conservatives use. Conservatives are like, oh, look, this really untalented man was really galvanized to become a woman so that he could succeed in the women's division, right? That's the narrative. The narrative here is that, oh, well, in 2018 to 2019, on the men's team, she was ranked 554th in the 200 freestyle and 65th in the 500 freestyle and 32nd in the 1650 freestyle. Which, again, and then they're like, and then you see she switched over to the women's division and then was on the women's team, and she came in 5th in the 200 freestyle, 1st in the 500 freestyle, and 8th in the 1650 freestyle. Right? These are the numbers that conservatives use. Right here. They compare the 2018 to 2019 season to the 2021-2022 season. And they're like, went from 554th to a first place finish. And you can see that if you look back one more year before she started HRT, she was one of the fastest men swimmers in the nation, in the men's division, right? And not only that, she did not win all of her races, right? She was 8th in the 1650 freestyle. She was 5th in the 200 freestyle. She only came in 1st in the 500 freestyle. So again, these people are butthurt now for years that she won one race. So I just really need to point out, Leah Thomas did her time. She transitioned, and she didn't transition so that she could beat women in swimming. She transitioned because that's what was medically best for her. And she wanted to continue competing, and she followed NCAA rules, and was able to compete in the women's division, and she went from being a very good men's division swimmer to a very good women's division swimmer. That is what conservatives have been complaining about nonstop for multiple years.
But the existence of a tiny handful of intersex cases is completely irrelevant to the issue of allowing males in female sports, prisons, and restrooms. Crafting policy to exclude males who identify as women, or trans women, from female-only spaces isn't complicated. That's because trans women...
Wait. She didn't go from 6th in men's to 5th in women's. To be clear, right? To be clear, right? She went from... Let's see. In 20... Okay. We have the comparison here. Yeah. She went from being the number one, having the number one time in the 500 free, 1000 free, and 1650 free. She had the top times in all 3 races to being... Let's check this out here. 5th, 1st, and 8th. Or wait. Oh, sorry, you're right. She went from being 6th at the 200 free to being 5th, and 1st in 500 to being 1st in the 500, and then 1st in 1650 to being 8th in 1650. Like, yeah, they're literally complaining about her having a downward trajectory for her times.
are unambiguously male, and so the chances that a doctor incorrectly recorded their sex at birth are essentially 0. Therefore, any transgender policy designed to protect female spaces need only specify that participants must have been recorded female on their original birth certificates.
Okay, and yet we have men, for example, who are born with uteruses. Like, that's not going to be caught by just looking at a baby's genitals. Like, again, people go their entire lives without knowing things like that. To this day.
Or, if no birth certificate listing sex is available, biology, not an individual's feelings, will determine whether the participant would be allowed to compete as a male or female.
And I need to really clarify here, because they're not saying it explicitly. When they're saying, the participants must have been recorded female on their original birth certificates. And I need to remind you guys what the visual was right before this. It's literally just a doctor looking at a baby's genitals. That's what they're talking about here, right? Oh, that's a dick. It must be a male.
Therefore, any transgender policy designed to protect female spaces need only specify that participants must have been recorded female on their original birth certificates.
Now remember, what they just stipulated was doctor sees genitals.
Or, if no birth certificate listing sex is available, biology, not an individual's feelings, will determine whether the participant would be allowed to compete as a male or female.
Which, by the way, if again the first thing is recorded by a doctor checking out genitals, then the second thing would also be ascertained by someone checking out a participant's genitals. This is just a very sanitized way of advocating for genital inspections for children and athletes. Oh, hey, you want your kid to participate in high school sports? Well, guess what? Some other track parents think that your kid is actually a boy. So, looks like the gym coach is going to have to pull down their pants and look at their genitals. Like, this, by the way, you might say, oh, Jack, that's crazy. That's crazy. No one would call for that. Yeah. That's crazy. No one would actually do that. Oh, wait. Utah parents triggered secret probe into the gender of a schoolgirl who outclassed opponents at a sports event to determine if she was biologically born a boy. This was in 2022 of last year. And you can find many, many more stories about this, actually. Man, I love, personally, when conservatives create literal gender inquisitions to figure out what the genitals are of high school children. Yeah, the federal breast inspector shirts literally predicted the future.
Crafting effective intersex policies is more complicated, but a much less pressing issue for protecting the integrity of women's sports. Individual organizations can decide for them.
And I do need to really emphasize here, organizations like PragerU or their funders like the Wilkes family do not actually give a single shit about the integrity of women's sports. They do not care about women's sports. They barely even acknowledge women's sports exist, okay? The only reason they pretend to care about it is because they know they can use it as a cudgel against trans people. That's it.
Themselves, which criteria should be used to keep female spaces safe and, in the context of sport, safe and fair. It is imperative, however, that such policies be rooted in properties of the body and not one's identity, because identity is not germane to issues of fairness and safety. You can.
It's also very interesting to me, right? It's very interesting that they put up stuff like, identity is not germane to issues of fairness and safety. And yet, I need to point this out. To you guys. The issue of women's sports does already have rules and regulations regarding how a trans person can participate in like men's sports or women's sports. There are already rules in place in like at the high school level, at the state, at the national level. Those rules already exist. The rules governing the fairness in these things already exist. And they still complain about them. They still complain that, oh, well, trans people will make it unfair, even though there are already rules in place to prevent that from happening. They're like, oh, well, trans women wouldn't be safe to the other women in prison settings, and that's why we need laws to regulate it. We already have regulations and rules about how trans prisoners are transferred between prisons. Those rules already exist in a lot of different places. Some places don't have those rules, but in places where they don't have those rules, they don't allow trans women to transfer into women's prisons. Again, this is just pretending that the rules and regulations that exist don't exist in order to spread a hateful agenda.
You can identify as anything you like, but your identity does not determine biological reality.
You know, that's funny. That's why trans women call themselves trans women. You know, like, trans people acknowledge that there is a physical differentiation between trans women and cis women. Trans women acknowledge that's inherent in the term trans woman or trans man. You know? that's already acknowledged. So what's really interesting here is the feigning of, like, the idea that trans women think they're exactly the same. This, by the way, is on par with saying, black women think they're women? Don't they realize they're biologically distinct from white women? Right? Like, that's what he's doing here. Trans women acknowledge that there is a biological distinction that differentiates them from cisgender women. That's why there's the term cis, or cisgender, and trans, or transgender. That's why those terms exist, to differentiate the type of woman we're talking about. Both are still women, and both acknowledge different biological backgrounds. That's it. That's all. It's very simple.
And the reality is that sex in humans is immutable and binary.
Don't jump the gun, Jack. PragerU probably has sussy takes on race phrenology. Funny you should mention that, because literally one of the things I was going to open this segment with was called The New York Times Accuses PragerU of Rationalizing Slavery. So, you know, we could go over that if you really want to, but I figured for time, we'll finish this video instead.
No amount of activist hysteria is ever going to change that. I'm Colin Wright, PhD in evolutionary biology and fellow at the Manhattan Institute for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video. To keep PragerU videos free,
You're welcome. Now fuck off and die.